Hey Bob Jones, welcome back to the Media Madhouse Podcast. I'm Rena.
And I'm Abbie. Today we're talking about Dune Part 2, which came out in March of last year. This is a little bit of an older topic compared to some of the other ones we've covered so far, but the Dune franchise is really interesting to us, and we're like branching out to, at least like in the last 5 years for the pop culture that we cover. So for this movie, I watched it a while back when it first came out.
And I just watched it this past weekend, and we had several thoughts about it. So to do a quick review, let's go over what happened in both the first and second movie from what we remember. And it is a little hard to follow along, so let's hope that we can remember most of it, even though we just watched it.
It's very dense, so there's a lot to cover.
So what happened in Dune Part 1?
So the first one, you first have this transfer of power from the Harkonnens to the Atreides over control of Arrakis for the spice trade and all that. The Atreides get set up on Arrakis, and they're trying to figure out all their stuff, but then the Harkonnens surprise attack them and blow up the palace and kill Duke Leto, which is the main character, Paul Atreides' dad. So Paul and his mother, Jessica, have to go out into the desert. They meet the Fremen, the people that live on Arrakis, and are learning their ways and whatnot. And along the way, Jessica is part of this spiritual group, the Bene Gesserit, and generally, their powers and whatnot are only transferred to females, but Paul ends up having these powers too, and the Fremen have this spiritual figure that they're looking for, sort of like Jesus to Christians in, real life, but they have Lisan al-Gaib, which is like their Jesus basically, and a lot of them believe that Paul is Lisan al-Gaib,
which is voice from the outer world.
Yes. So, they start having this sort of, spiritual divide on who believes in him and who doesn't. And at the same time, he's having to, accept this role in his life and be confident in it. Because if he's not confident in it, then he can't get people to follow him and try and take back the main, power structure of Arrakis from the Harkonnens. So he's mainly doing it for that reason.
Which that's Iraqi.
But anyway, so Paul is having to rally people around him for this. And at the same time, Jessica is really accepting this role as Reverend Mother, both as a Bene Gesserit and as a leader for the Fremen to sort of congregate around spiritually. And she's also pregnant with Paul's sister, played by a
CGI baby at first.
By a CGI baby that's voiced by Anya Taylor-Joy, because, that's just how it is sometimes.
Because why not?
Why not? Actually, that's getting into the second movie. So we're just going along.
Just go over the whole story, to be honest.
We're going along. So they end up rallying support, and they storm Arrakeen and end up taking it over while the Emperor is visiting. And you also have a bunch of stuff with the Harkonnens going on. Raban, basically the Baron, thinks that, he's not doing good on Arrakis and he's being sort of insubordinate and not getting the results that he wants. So Feyd-Rautha has to take over for his brother Raban. Well, the Baron pretty much is you're going to do this.
It's his birthday present or whatever.
It's his birthday present.
I'm going to attempt to kill you. And then if you survive, I'm going to give you Arrakis.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, nephew.
And at the same time, on that same day, one of the Bene Gesserit is basically sent out to get pregnant by Feyd-Rautha for political reasons, basically as having another
heir to the bloodline.
Yeah. Just the Bene Gesserit in general just likes to have their fingers in literally everything.
Oh, they control everything.
So that was what that was for. But anyway, back to Arrakeen and Paul storming it. So Feyd-Rautha is there, the Baron's there, the Emperor's there. Paul ends up killing the Baron, and then he challenges Feyd-Rautha to a fight and ends up killing Feyd-Rautha, who he, at this point, had discovered was his cousin because his mom, Jessica, reveals to him that she is the daughter of the Baron as well.
Well, he finds it out, but he's like, how long did you know? And she's like, I didn't know until I drank the water of life. And then he drinks the water of life, and he knows because it's he gains insight from his ancestors, which is all the Bene Gesserit before him. Yeah. And that's probably why he goes a little cuckoo crazy.
Yeah.
A little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs over there at the end.
So something that we had talked about, prior to this that I found really interesting is that at that reveal, Paul sort of has to have this moment of viewing things less so as the Atreides versus the Harkonnens and more so himself versus everyone else. Because at this point, he had been seeing the Harkonnens as the enemy, and he still does to an extent because they're directly against the ideals that he's fighting for.
But now he's part Harkonnen, so that overcomplicates everything, and now it's not just Atreides versus Harkonnen, it's Paul versus everyone, and the Fremen versus his people versus everything else.
Yeah. And I do think it also helps to like cement his role, like religious role. He finds more comfort in it because it's like it sets him apart, and he's not necessarily having to be a part of Harkonnen, Bene Gesserit, or Atreides factions, and that he can form his own beliefs and own ideals that he wants to fight for.
Yeah, I mean, definitely at the end, and especially if they continue making more movies, it definitely becomes a power trip.
Yeah.
But let's get on to what we liked and what we didn't like about Dune Part 2. So, first off, the visuals and the music, oh my god.
Delicious.
That was fantastic. I am not usually so impressed by visuals like that, but I feel like every single time we were looking at something, I was like, man, this is really good. I want to see the concept art for this. This is fantastic. And I feel like along those lines, the technology is super cool. Like the ornithopters or whatever they're called. I feel like because Star Wars is as old as it is, you see a lot of sci-fi stuff that's based on that. Yeah. And I know that Dune is, the original book was written in 1900 something, whatever. So that helps a lot, is that it already has its kind of technology established. But it's just really cool to see the unique take on technology that you don't typically see anymore in sci-fi. Like it feels very, oh, this is the staple. Yeah. Like even between Star Trek and Star Wars, I feel like that technology is very similar. And those are like the two big sci-fi franchises. So there's all that. But visuals, amazing. The ornithopters, I love those little things. They're so silly.
Well, even in like the opening sequence for the whole movie, you have like the Fremen and the Harkonnen like fighting each other in like the dunes, and just the oranges they use are so like striking and vibrant and amazing, and I love them so much.
Colors are beautiful.
They really are.
Oh, and the costume design.
Oh, it's so good. Like anytime a Bene Gesserit shows up, I'm like, that's the most gorgeous like costume I've ever seen.
It's so unique. And in like a good way. I don't mean that condescendingly. It's so unique in such a good way. Now, obviously, because it's not our typical modern real life society kind of fashion, you look at something like the head Reverend Mother, whatever her name is, her silly little hat is a
like
little funny.
Incredibly tall.
It's like, oh, you look like a chef. You look like a widowed chef. I'm not gonna lie. But it's either way, it's still a really cool design. And especially Jessica's outfits in any scene is beautiful.
I love like all of like the beaded face masks they give her. They're so like, I don't know, like it's this different sort of regal that is so striking to me, and I love it so much.
It's so intricate.
And I feel like that also goes into just like the Dune movies deviating so much from what we know modernly as like sci-fi visuals. It's going away from this like clean cut, everything's very like sharp and clean, and like, or like you have like that side of it that's like more Star Trek-y, or you have like the Star Wars side that's a little like exposed parts and sort of like blocky looking. But then Dune, you have to take it as a more like, with the textures and everything, it has to be a lot more natural. And I think that they really tie that in, and it's what makes it look so interesting, is you have more natural textures and more natural patterns, even with like the regalness of things.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. On the other side of that, though, because, me and Abbie, we watched it together. We watched Dune Part 2 together. We watched Dune Part 1 together as well. We watched both of them together, but we had seen at least Dune Part 1 separately. Both movies are really hard to watch outside of a theater. Because for as amazing as the visuals are, we didn't even get into the music. The music is fantastic, wonderful composition, just it fits so well with each scene. But the issue is not the music, but just the voices that they have. Like there's so many instances where characters are whispering and you cannot hear them.
Yeah.
If you have any background noise going on at all, cannot hear what they're saying. It's really difficult to understand what's going on if you cannot see or hear anything, because the visual contrast from dark to bright lighting, in bright lighting it's fine, but if you're watching it not in a completely pitch black room like a theater, it's really hard to see what's going on, and you pretty much only see like vague silhouettes of what's happening.
I think that's in general just like a problem with really high level cinematic stuff. Like what I initially thought of when we started talking about this was the Lord of the Rings movies, which I absolutely love. But like even just in the opening, you have like Galadriel talking over all of like this history within Lord of the Rings, and it's like this like booming music for so much of it, and then she's just there whispering, and it does that so much throughout those movies, and it's so hard to like have like a standard volume to watch it at because everything is just fluctuating so much. And that goes into the lighting too. Like you have so many people, I feel like especially now, complaining about like TVs and movies being way too dark during so many scenes and just not being able to see anything. Like there is a way to light things to where you get the atmosphere across that it's dark, but you can still see what's happening. And they don't do that very much in this movie.
If you take a look at like any 90s movies that are especially horror like that, like they get that atmosphere across very simply and very well without the need of having to shroud the characters in dark, so much so that you can only see the whites of their eyes and their dinky little teeth. Like I can't see what's happening. You gotta turn on a light, man. Light a candle or something.
Yeah. Well, a lot of like studios will use like a blue light or something. Also thinking about Lord of the Rings, the one scene that I do think they light very well in the dark, one of the battles, it's like all in the dark and they have all these elves and stuff, but they light it all with blue light. So it feels more like moonlight and not just like, oh, they're in the pitch black, because obviously it's nighttime, but you still want to see them.
Yeah. I mean, and those are really good scenes too. Like those are one of the most well-known scenes in that franchise, is those battle scenes of, even though it's nighttime, you can still see what's happening. And if you ever go to like a school or you watch a YouTube video that's talking about cinematography lighting, they'll probably talk about that.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's a way to get that atmosphere without being so dark you can't tell what's going on.
Yeah.
There's ways to do it. But the audio is definitely my main issue, because even if you can't see what's happening, you can pretty much infer what's happening. But when you can't hear it, I mean, you're just Helen Keller up here. Like, you can't see, you can't hear, you have no idea what's going on. You're like, man, am I watching a movie or am I watching a black screen? I got no idea. It was really hard to watch, especially when we were watching it together. Like, if you have headphones on or something, if you don't have surround sound kind of audio, you'll go from whispering to, oh my God, that is the most bass I've heard in a movie in all my 17 years. In all my 17 years, I have never, ever experienced a thing. And it really reminds me of, if any of you guys have seen the movie Arrival, which is really good. It's like also sci-fi kind of thing of humans make contact with aliens, whatever. Really good movie. But it's kind of similar in that aspect of, it's really quiet and then it'll have like jarringly loud moments and it's really funny, only for the fact that like my grandmother and my father were trying to watch it. And my father was trying to take a nap because it was like 4 a.m. and my grandmother was just watching the movie. And he could not sleep because he would be taking a nap and it would be super quiet and there's just blah. It's like, okay. And
That's really good.
He would wake up with like a cold start. It's like, oh my
What's
God.
happening?
And I fear that if you were to put Dune on as like a background movie to be like, oh, you know, I want so-and-so to watch this movie and I'm going to go do literally anything else, it's going to scare the crap out of you because it's just out of nowhere loudness.
One scene in particular that really felt like that for me when we were watching it is the scene where the Fremen are trying to like bomb the Harkonnen spice harvester. And like, I love that scene so much. It's one of my favorite in the movie. And like, it has such good visuals and explosions and stuff, but it is so loud. Like the music and the explosions are just like, you cranked it all the way up. And like, it does fit the scene, but it's just like the scenes before and after it are so quiet in comparison to this incredibly loud scene.
And it's like, oh my God, now I have to turn my volume down on whatever I'm watching this on by like 20% just so I can hear anything else.
Yeah.
But, you know, other than that, really good visuals, really good music composition especially. Story writing, fantastic.
Top tier.
Obviously, it's based off of books
that we have not read.
We have not read these books. I want to clarify, we have not read them. We have no idea if they're accurate, but as far as I've seen, I've not seen anyone online complain about it. So I think it's fine. I think it's relatively accurate.
There were like a couple of things that we thought were a little awkward, just like pacing wise. Like Raban's death felt so anticlimactic. Like, he is a lot less important in this movie, and he is like obviously been pushed down a position, but the way he dies is just so like, he's stabbed and now he's gone.
Raban is having this nice little fight with Gurney, who is Paul's old master. Gurney's kind of like, oh my God, you killed the entirety of House Atreides. I'm going to get revenge on you. And what should be this really intense fight, because Raban is noble of House Harkonnen. He should know how to fight. He clearly does know how to fight. And like obviously Gurney does too, because he's the one who trained Paul on how to fight. But the fight only lasts like maybe 30 seconds, if that.
Gurney just like stabs him, and
He
then
just stabs him,
dead.
and that's it. That's like,
and then they move on.
And then they move on. They don't talk about it. They don't say anything. And it's like, I get it. There's not really anyone to mourn him because then the Baron dies and then Fade Rotha dies. But like, I feel like you could have added some more oomph to that rather than just, oh, let's kill him off here. Because the scene just felt very out of place. It's like the Capitol is getting attacked. There is Raban, and he should be doing something, but he's trying to flee, and then he ends up having like this little fight that's not even a fight, and then he dies, and that's it, and then they move on. And it's like, okay, cool. Was there a point to that? Like, his death felt very pointless.
And obviously, like, I don't know how he dies in the books, but in the movie, it kind of felt like the main Harkonnens that are still in control have to be killed off. So we need to just get this out of the way so we don't have to spend any more time on it. And that's just kind of how it felt to me.
Yeah, I felt we just want to wipe our hands clean of them. We don't want to do anything else. So there was that. But we'll move on to Reverend Mother Jessica.
Guys, I love her. She's such an interesting character to me. She is so manipulative, but like, her priorities are so interesting to me.
She is the perfect kind of girl boss. She clearly believes in the Bene Gesserit cause because that's what she grew up with, but she's also like finds her children to be the most important thing. Like, it's that kind of manipulative, toxic mother relationship that I adore so much. If any of you guys have ever seen His Dark Materials, which is a show that is based off of The Golden Compass, if you've ever watched the movie The Golden Compass, it's the same book. So His Dark Materials is based off the same books. Really good. There is a character in there called Marissa Coulter, and she is kind of that similar thing, which obviously she's a lot more psychotic than Jessica is, but it's that same kind of thing of she's so obsessed with her children that she is literally willing to do anything to give them whatever she wants. Like, she wants what she perceives to be the best for them, no matter what they have to think about it. So like, Jessica's coming over here and she's like, you're the Messiah. I've told the Fremen that you're the Messiah, and I think you're the Messiah, so you're going to be the Messiah. It's like,
and like, this is what you need to do to enact this plan that I've just created for us to like survive in this environment.
Like, she creates this entire life for Paul, and Paul's like, actually, I don't want to do that. And then he drinks the water of life, and he's like, actually, I do. You're right. Maybe you're right. I mean, he's surrounded by these people who are feeding him into this. Like, you have the Fremen who are literally worshiping him. You have his mom who's encouraging it highly. Like, she set up the entire South to worship him before he even got there. And that's one of the reasons why he's like, oh, I don't want to go to the South. And Chani's like, oh, he's afraid to go there because they're fundamentalists and they recognize him as a Messiah already before he was even introduced as a face there. Yeah. It's just really cool to see that. I mean, it's really nice to see that their relationship between Jessica and Paul is just not so static and flat. Like, I feel like when it comes to familial dynamics like that, you either have, oh, they're so cute and wholesome and wonderful, or you have it, oh my God, they hate each other. But you get this kind of middle ground of they love each other, but they have their differences. And that's so realistic, and I adore that.
Well, when you were like initially talking about His Dark Materials like connection there, it also made me think of like Silco and Jinx and Arcane, and like, I really adore the relationship because it's sort of similar where you have like a parent who is willing to do so much for their child, even if like they're trying to balance doing things for their child and what they are wanting to do morally and having to like fight with their ideals and fitting their child within those ideals. And it's just, I don't know, it's so interesting to me. Jessica is such an interesting character in like how she evolves, but both how her and Paul evolve from the first movie to the second one.
Their character development is something really good. I love when they actually develop the main characters like that. Because I feel like in a lot of the movies that I see recently, you have the characters around them that are developing, but the characters themselves that are the focus of the story are not really developing all that much. The most development that you see is that they, oh, I believe in this ideal, they change their ideal, and they're like, oh, no, wait, my original ideal was right. But in this, they're actually changing over time, and there's time skips, which that's another one of the things that made the movie so confusing was a couple of time skips, but other than that, that was fine. But you have this development over time where these characters are actually changing, and they're actually growing, and if you see them from the beginning of part 1 to the end of part 2, they are different characters.
I think it's also interesting that like they're not just changed by big events happening at once. It's very like gradual over time, and like especially with Paul, I feel like you see the pressure that the Fremen are putting on him to be in this religious like position over time. It's like slowly chipping away at him, and he's slowly believing that he is over time. And like obviously the big events do impact him greatly, but it's not just those, and it's this gradual buildup of things and escalation of this situation.
Fade Rotha.
He's a little creature, dude.
And not in a good way.
Not in a good way. Creature derogatory.
He is actually a freak. I've never been more uncomfortable with a character in a while. And I get that that's the point.
They do it so well. Like, they make you feel so uncomfortable, like, with him.
And I get that's the point. You're supposed to be uncomfortable. Because the Bene Gesserit literally describe him. He's described literally as psychotic. Like, he loves to kill for fun. When his introduction scene happens, he's literally just like, oh, let me test out my blades. And then he just kills, like, 2 random maids.
He has such an interesting relationship with everybody. Like, I was gonna say women, but he's like, he acts the same towards women and men in just a way where he's like, you're like literally like a little rag doll in my face, and I'm gonna do whatever I want with you to like everybody.
Yeah.
And it's so weird. Like, even to the Baron, because you have that scene on stage where he's like, oh, our new ruler of Arrakis, Fade Rotha. And then he like kisses Fade Rotha, and then Fade Rotha just grabs his face and kisses him again. And it's so like,
he went back in for seconds.
He went back in for seconds.
And this was on the lips, by the way.
But
Uncle and nephew kiss on the lips, and the nephew goes back in for seconds.
Related people kissing on the lips.
Related people.
That's
nephew, son, doesn't matter.
Oh my gosh, the way he grabs him is just so, I have no respect for you. And that's how he is with literally everyone, is he doesn't respect anyone, and he sees them as like objects for him to mess around with.
I mean, I feel like that's almost the Baron as well. Obviously not in the same sociopathic kind of way, but it's really funny. The scene where the Baron and Fade Rotha first talk is when Fade Rotha comes in and is like, you tried to kill me. Mm-hmm. And the Baron's like, happy birthday.
Like, isn't that just silly of me?
Like, is it happy birthday? Like, he has him in the fighting ring, and one of the Atreides prisoners doesn't have whatever serum makes them fight a little wonky, I guess.
Just like he isn't drugged, basically.
Yeah, they're like, this slave is walking straight. It's like, I didn't know that they didn't do that, but you know, they were drugged or whatever. The Baron's just like using his little binoculars, and he's looking down at Fade Rotha as he's about to fight this slave, and he's like, happy birthday.
It's so funny and like out of place. I don't know, it like fits the tone of them seeing violence as such this like normal part of life so well, and I think they just like in general characterize them so well.
Fade Rotha has put himself into a fighting ring as entertainment.
Mm-hmm. And like, it's not even like watching fighting. He's like, I'm participating in this violence just because I think it's fun and silly.
Yeah. And then he almost dies, and he's like, you tried to kill me. Anyways, let's go.
Let's continue.
I was like, okay, whatever.
Speaking of the fighting ring, though, I like that whole scene being in black and white. Like, I know Gady Prime in particular, like in the books, is supposed to like filter out colored light and stuff, but I just think it's such an interesting detail that they added in. And it set that scene apart from everything else in the film, because you have like, especially on Arrakis, everything being these like vibrant color palettes, and then on Gady Prime it's just all black and white, and I feel like it makes them opposing in a way that's really interesting, because like obviously they have such different values, and by doing that through color is
it's such a cool contrast.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't see a lot of stuff like that.
I'm going to talk about Stilgar now, because I really like Stilgar.
Stilgar is very silly. I love him.
Silly.
He's so funny at times. I mean, he's like Paul's biggest supporter. He's like, I'm going to worship you.
Yeah.
And then he'll do like he'll make a quip or a joke, and it's like, I like you.
That was good.
I like you.
One of my like favorite bits that he does is like while Jessica is drinking the water of life and is like going through it, and like she just comes out and Stilgar is like, as prophesized, and then everyone just starts praying, and it's like he's so there for Paul, and it's so funny to me.
You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Brick from The Middle, where like where like something would happen and he would whisper to himself, and he's like, this is just what I foresaw. It's like, okay.
Like it's literally Stilgar.
When Paul was like riding the sandworm or whatever, and like as soon as he does it, Stilgar just like looks off to the side and he goes, as written. It's like, written. It's like, okay, bro is so, he knows the scriptures so well, but it's so funny because every single thing that Paul does, he's like, this is like what I read. This is like what I read. He's like a kid obsessed with a certain media, and he's like, this is just like this.
Yeah.
I know this. I've seen this before.
It's like they satirize like religious like hyper religious people with Stilgar in like such a funny way, and I love it so much.
One of my favorite things is when Paul is still like really against being the Messiah. Paul's like, I'm not the Messiah. I'm just here to learn your ways. And then Stilgar goes, and the Messiah said he would be humble too. It's like, okay. You're really just feeding into it. That's so good.
Like, he's just so, like, literally anything happens and he's like, just like the prophecy.
This is just like what I read. It's like, you are so silly. I love you. Please keep being like how you are. That's so funny.
And it's such a funny contrast to him in the first movie too, though, because like Paul meets him as this like rough and tough leader of this group of Fremen that he meets. And then in the second one, he's just this goofy guy.
Yeah. Especially in the first movie when they're fighting and he's like, Jessica gets him like a knife chokehold and he's like, peace, woman, peace. You did not tell me you could fight like that. It's really good.
I also like, because he does have some serious moments in the second one too. I love the scene where he's talking with Jessica about like the role that she's going to have to fulfill while they're by the water. And he's like explaining the importance of this to the Fremen. And in general, I really do love, even though Stilgar is a little goofy about some of the religious stuff, I like seeing the religious side of the Fremen and getting to learn more about their culture. And I think they did it very respectfully. And I don't know, it was just very interesting. And I appreciate how they approached it.
Yeah, especially their relationship to water is a really good thing. Going back to the technology thing as well, is like the way that they respect their dead is to essentially wrap them and then pump their water out of them, and then they put that water into a well that is sacred or whatever. And it's like the old Reverend Mother or whatever of the Fremen says, like, even if the entire population of the Fremen were dying of thirst, they would not drink this water. That's how sacred it is. And it's like, that's really unique. I mean, it's really beautiful, and I think it reflects a lot of sacred religion today that has those kind of similar values.
Like, religious things like that just make, I feel like, people who don't follow them like really think about the things in their life. And even if it's something as simple as water, it really helps them to just like think about how they have it and how they can take it for granted and to not take it for granted as much.
Yeah, because especially us in like a first world country, it's like there's so many things that I'm going to take for granted. It's like you could open up a bottle of water, drink half of it, and then throw it away. And it's like that would be so wasteful. I mean, it is wasteful. Not only are you wasting the plastic because you didn't recycle it, but you're wasting the water. And it's like, if you look at these religions, they find that so sacred that doing that is
almost like sacrilegious.
Yeah, it's sacrilegious to do such a thing. So it's really beautiful to see how the Fremen religion is developed, especially including the Bene Gesserit religion and how their prophecies align with that. Speaking of the Fremen, we finally learned Zendaya's name in part 2. Before, which I feel like in any role that she plays, she's just kind of Zendaya.
Yeah.
I never remember her name. Like, if I'm watching Spider-Man, it's not Spider-Man and MJ. It's Spider-Man and Zendaya.
Yeah, like she is just a character Zendaya, even if she's doing like wildly different things.
She's just her own character. Zendaya is canon in every universe.
The Zendaya multiverse.
That's really good. That's really good. Write that down. Write that down. But Chani is such a beautiful character. I mean, she's the only one who really hasn't yet given in to what the prophecy is and how it relates to Paul. And her original name, whatever her original name is, which they only mention it once, but it essentially means like desert spring. And the whole prophecy is that Paul will drink the water of life and then be revived by desert spring tears. And I think that's really cool as well. It's like she cries on him Rapunzel style and he suddenly revived. I mean, not exactly in the same way as Rapunzel. She like cries and then she dips it into the water of life and then she like shoves it into his mouth. I was like,
drink up.
Well, that's not very romantic, but whatever.
Yeah.
But it's really cool to see how Paul and Chani's relationship develops because they start out as, strangers, but then they very quickly get into a romantic relationship before Paul has had time to really go into his role as the Messiah for the Fremen. And then as he gets more and more into it, she starts getting more frustrated because she's like, all I need you to be is who you are right now.
Like, I just need you to be Paul.
Like, yeah.
And not this, like super religious figure that everyone's worshiping. And she's almost like an atheist almost.
Yeah. I mean, she says it herself is that those beliefs came from the South, which is where the fundamentalists are. So when all of that work that, Reverend Mother Jessica has been doing, it finally infiltrates Fremen's in the North, then suddenly everyone except for her is kind of like worshiping Paul at his feet. And they're in a romantic relationship. So it gets even more strained once he literally sees himself not as Paul, but as like Paul, Muad'Dib, Atreides, the Lisan al-Gaib. He literally throws himself into this role, especially as soon as he fights Feyd-Rautha. And then he defeats Feyd-Rautha, who is being the champion for the Emperor at the time. Like, hey, if you defeat Feyd-Rautha, then you defeated the Emperor. Mm-hmm. And then Paul is like, I will take your daughter's hand in marriage, which is Princess Irulan. And then you can see Chani's face. Like, it's genuinely heartbreaking because they are in a romantic relationship. And it's not that Paul sees Princess Irulan in a romantic way. It's that he sees it as another grab for power. And it's at this end where you can see the beginning of Paul in Dune Part 1 is just this innocent little kid who doesn't really know what he's doing, into Dune Part 2, where he is this figure of a religious power who is feeding into his role and is suddenly becoming power hungry. And especially if you go into the books more, he's not a good person. Like, he is kind of like this religious dictator. And especially if we get into his son later on.
Oh my gosh.
Which we will. This is not in Dune Part 2, by the way.
This is just like later in the books.
Yeah, Dune Part 2 pretty much ends right after Feyd-Rautha is killed. And the Fremen are victorious over Arrakis, the battle of the entirety of Arrakis, after the capital is raided and the Emperor is defeated. He really becomes this power-hungry individual, and Chani can kind of see that. And it makes me really interested for how they're going to play into their relationship after the fact, because I'm just saying, me personally, if that happened, I wouldn't stay with Paul.
Yeah.
He's kind of being mean.
Well, I think it like his actions both show a level of not respecting Chani, but at the same time, she's seeing him lose self-respect and seeing him see himself as this like political religious figure more than anything, and that he doesn't want to marry the princess, but he's doing it for political power. You can either take it as like he's personally becoming power hungry, or he's doing this for the Fremen. But I don't know. To me, it feels like he's kind of just manipulating the Fremen to get more power.
Yeah. It's kind of this whole thing of like, Princess Irulan will become his wife in name only. Yeah. In quotations, in name only. It kind of legitimizes his rise as an emperor, because the end of the movie has it to where all the other house warships are kind of like coming in to help in some way, I guess, to help the Emperor who's already been defeated. And you know,
I think it's like they're trying to stamp down the Fremen, because like everybody uses this planet as like a spice resource, and no one wants to see the Fremen winning, even if they don't necessarily want to see the Harkonnens winning either.
Yeah. And Paul turns to Gurney and is like, send a message that the Emperor's been defeated or whatever. And he's like, okay, message sent. And then he comes back and he's like, guess what, Paul? They don't care. And it's like, okay, cool. So the end of that is kind of like, I guess Paul preparing to see what'll happen. So I guess him marrying Princess Irulan helps legitimize that to the other houses. You can't really tell, because the end of the movie just kind of ends with Chani going off on her own. Hopefully we'll see more of her. Maybe she'll get some individual time. That'll be really cool to see her not through the perspective of Paul, because you can see that most of the movie is through his perspective.
Yeah. It would definitely be interesting to just see, like, what she chooses to go off and do, even if it's not related to Paul, just, like, how she wants to be separate from everybody and how she takes that. Yeah.
Overall, I think the movie was really good.
Yeah.
There, of course, were little tweaks with it, but really good movie. I really enjoyed watching it. What would you give your rating?
I'd say, like, a solid 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10. It's a really good movie, and I appreciate it.
I'd say, yeah. I think I'd also say 9 out of 10. If I were to watch it in theaters, I think it really would be almost 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
But it's the fact of the matter that the contrast of visual lighting and audio contrast that just kind of like is a little jarring.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to take a little bit off of that. It's not a perfect movie, so we can't give it a perfect score.
Yeah.
But really good movie. It's been a while since I've seen a movie that has that much depth and complication to its storyline.
Yeah.
Which is always going to happen with movie adaptations. But speaking of the movie adaptations from books,
what should they do if they want to see more Dune?
Well, of course, there are the books. There is about 26 Dune books. But if you want to read the ones that have the original storyline, just read the first 6. Those are written by Frank Herbert. The other 20 or so are picked up by his son, Brian Herbert. And they have some really really mixed reviews. So that's about it. But just giving you a warning, if you do read the other books, and we're going to get into some spoiler territory right here, they get really weird.
Frank Herbert's son was a little silly.
Not even just his son. Frank Herbert himself is really strange. If they get into the 4th book, which is the God Emperor of Arrakis or whatever, Paul Atreides' son, which is the son of Paul himself and Chani, he has these Bene Gesserit powers, and he has this very high religious standing of himself. Like, he sees himself as another Messiah. And he's like, oh, in order to make sure that this world goes down the path that I want it to, he combines himself with a worm, a sandworm. He becomes a sandworm god.
Which, like, makes more sense in the universe because of, like, how highly they think of the sandworms and how they also hold them to such a high religious status. But, like, just reading it being like, oh, yeah, Paul's son turns into a worm. It's like, that's a choice you want.
He's on the book cover, too, and he looks weird.
I don't know. He reminds me of something that would be like in Dungeons and Dragons that you'd be flipping through the monster manual and you're just like, what is that?
And then you'd move on. And you would never talk about it.
Because it's uncomfortable.
But unfortunately, if you read the book, you have to talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
So read at your own risk. If you like a little bit of sci-fi mixed in with little weird, almost horror-esque stuff like that, this might be perfect for you.
Or just go watch Alien.
Which, if you ever know why the aliens look the way they do, you should read up on why they look like that. That's really interesting, too.
But we're not going to get into that.
We are not going to get into that.
You research at your own risk.
Research at your own risk. Read at your own risk. But no matter the risk, go watch Dune Part 2.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good movie.
So that'll wrap up this 3rd episode. All right, and we will see you guys later. Tune in next week.
Game on, Bob Jones.
Game on.